Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm very excited to introduce a panel who I'm sure you're going to enjoy, and I'll explain why we chose them for this conversation after I tell you who they are. Dr. Jenny Radesky is the Assistant Professor of Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics at the University of Michigan's Medical School. Her NIH-funded research examines use of mobile and interactive technologies by parents and young children, and her clinical work focuses on autism, ADHD, and family advocacy in underserved communities. She's authored American Academy of Pediatrics policy statements on media and children, which means she writes the rules about screen time. Dr. Emily Oster, who we're going to call Emily today, is an author and professor of economics at Brown University. She's the author of Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, and The Family Firm, which is a brand new book we recommend. She holds a PhD in economics from Harvard. She taught at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business before coming to Brown and joining their faculty. Emily's research focuses on health economics and statistical methodology. Her books analyze the data behind choices in pregnancy and parenting. Expecting Better analyze the data between many common pregnancy rules and aims to improve decision-making for pregnant women. Crib Sheet does the same for early childhood. And her new book, which I just finished and really adore, is called The Family Firm and takes this approach to parenting in the early school years, looking at data for school, extracurriculars, sleep, and provides a framework for making unexpected decisions and addressing the logistical parenting choices right now. So when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do for you all today, because we know this is a pretty crazy, unprecedented time, as we keep saying, we really wanted to provide some guardrails for how you're making decisions in your lives right now. And Jenny is someone that Common Sense has relied upon for a long time in terms of her research, her compassion for the parent-child relationship, and her strong research around kids and screens. And we thought it'd be fun to pair her with our new friend, Emily, who her research is obviously also research-based, but she has a pragmatic look that incorporates the whole household. So you might be having all these lofty ideas about how you're going to raise these perfect children, but someone has to get the kids to school and pick up the groceries. And I think Emily's approach is very good at joining both of those. So I plan to be very low touch. I'll pop in and out here today, but I really just want to get to our panelists and ask you both, how are you doing right now? And how do you think we're all doing? So Jenny, I would just start with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to pop
thanks.
out.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I think we want to start by just kind of laying the groundwork for the fact that this is our 19th, 20th month maybe of pandemic parenting. It's pretty exhausting. That we wanted to have a conversation today that addresses the fact that a lot of you and us might be feeling pretty disoriented, pretty, I like the word unmoored a little bit, because I think we've all been living in our own isolated bubbles of reality through technology too, and sometimes not even seeing all the same information. So we might have all kind of very different realities. We don't have as many opportunities to make meaning together and make sense together. So we're hoping to have a kind of a clear-headed conversation about the way we can stay adaptable to the changing, shifting sands around the pandemic, around technology. But I think my main goal today is to talk about intentional tech use, because when our tank is low and we're kind of exhausted as we are at this point of the pandemic, parenting often is very reactive. It's just like, you might just be feeling really touchy, like a raw nerve, and you may be making media decisions in the moment that are really just based on your affect and your emotion in that moment. They may not be based on logic or the kind of larger family goals and overarching values that we've all tried to keep in touch with during this pandemic. So, Emily, I'm curious kind of how you see this as well. From you're an economist, I'm a pediatrician, right? So I've mostly been seeing families from a one-on-one standpoint, where I am like responding to their intense level of needs during the pandemic. But I think we've been experiencing similar things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my way into kind of how people are feeling about this is through, writing for a fairly large audience at this point of kind of parents. And sometimes people will say, like, how do you decide what to write about? And the answer is people just like, they express their fears and their anxieties. And I think that this is, there are these moments, there was kind of one in like February where people, I think just there was a sort of like a little bit of a hopelessness. And I think there's a moment kind of now of like sort of some combination of exhaustion and confusion. I think unmoored is a good word. In some ways it feels more like normal, like it sort of, and I think because the activities, the sort of day-to-day, our activities are a little bit more normal, it feels like we should be feeling a little bit more normal,
Right.
and yet it's kind of not. And I think that for many people is coupled with the idea that like, okay, this isn't really going to end. Like there isn't going to be like a moment where we sort of like just announce that everything is back to the way it was before. And that I think we were hoping for that, and it was not really, we were hoping for that, but it's not happening. Right. And that has left people, I think touchy and just anxious, and that interfaces with a lot of the parenting choices that we make and around screens as well as everything else. So,
but I think that also that mismatch between the feeling that things in a day-to-day way are going back to normal. Like my kids are at school right now, which they were not this time last year. They were not in February either. And the mismatch between that feeling of like, well, I have just as many emails to answer as I did, before the pandemic, and yet my emotional reserves or, ability to feel like all of it is manageable. That sort of mismatch, I think, makes people feel guilty usually, or there's some shame, or often some self-blame. So I think that's why also having kind of a pragmatic discussion of like, okay, what are we going to do in this moment? It's so that it's not wallowing in this discomfort that comes from that feeling. But I also, what you say makes me remember that we've had so many ups and downs during this time, as you've probably been feeling through feedback from your newsletter and your blogging, and that I get from my clinical population, right? That there's been these like highs and lows and moments of hope and then like moments of despair. And I do think that the return to school, like late August, was one of those moments of like high anxiety and anger and frustration around parents, where they wanted things to be back to normal, but then Delta was here, and there were all these new shifting rules and expectations to be dealing with.
Yeah. And I think, I think there is a sort of decision fatigue. So which is just like, it feels like we're making so many decisions, and parenting is always a lot of decisions. And then the COVID decisions were on top of that, and people sort of thought we would be done with them. And then they were not done, and they were still, and again, I think it leaves us relatively few reserves to make all the sort of regular day-to-day parenting decisions, like what's the right amount of screen time, or what are the other things we want to be doing. And then we end up kind of parenting in this reactive way, and then feeling bad about it. And then was it called a shame spiral? Is that from you? Are you like, maybe I'm like too old? You're not like the right age for clueless, because it seems like you might be younger than me. But there was a shame spiral for sure.
Yeah. This whole pandemic has been a big shame spiral. And I think the ironic, but also helpful, but also annoying part of it is that we've all been so immersed and dependent upon technology during the whole time that we have kind of a lot of the parents I've talked to have kind of dealt with these different times of inertia or regression or frustration, and just trying to manage the small kind of victories of day-to-day kind of coping and getting through things. And yet the tech industry is like, it's like, keep on trucking along, right? They're making record profits, many of them, because of all the time that kids are spending online, all the time adults are spending online. They've had, plenty of time to create and generate new products that kids are using. And that also that mismatch between the pace that technology is just zooming on ahead, and all of us with this decision fatigue of like, should I let my kid get a phone? Should I let my kid get on Instagram? Those are really tough decisions that you may not have the mental capacity for. So I think in addition to your decision-making framework, I'm going to try and talk through a few ideas about technology. Like, is it junk or is it good for your kid? Like, when is it worth your kid's time and attention? When is it really just trying to monetize your kid's time and attention? When is it a really supporting their social development? When is it really not giving them enough opportunities to get social activities? Those are the sorts of decision guides that I hope we can provide.
Yeah. And I think it also, as part of that, I think that it's just like very important that we dial down the sort of generalized technology shame, and we acknowledge like there are good ways to use technology. There are good and not just like to only exclusively like do math apps, like there is like good relaxing television and media consumption that can be like a really normal, healthy, high quality, productive use of your kids' time and sort of incorporate it into your life. And I feel like somehow, because we occasionally get into a place of thinking like TV is bad, and so I only sort of use it as a crutch, or I use it as a kind of like to get around, and like if I were a better parent, I would be not doing this at all. I think that is not right. It is also not helpful, and it gets in the way of making good decisions, because then we're sort of like, oh, all TV is bad, so all TV is exactly as bad as each other, which is of course not at all.
And maybe we can, Sarah, I see your back, Sarah. If
Sarah,
we could,
did I say something wrong?
I know, I would love to hear, like, if we start off this conversation with this frame shift of like not lumping all the technologies together, really reflecting on what's been positive through this year, because that's actually going to help parents, if they reflect on that, make the decisions for what should be the sort of balance in their family. Let's make it about having a healthy, positive relationship with technology, not about the like screen time limits and things like that. Because I have found like Skype has been a lifesaver with my parents who live in New York and I'm in Michigan, and we really feel like we know each other and we've known what each other's going through during this, and we have weekly conversations. It's been so meaningful to me because I've been just watching them to make sure they're okay, and like, do they seem depressed? And so video chat, I think everyone thinks, yes, that's been a lifeline. Like number 2, The Mandalorian.
I'm just going to jump out because you're doing exactly. I was hoping to get some good, positive, practical examples. So,
okay. No, so number 2, I'd say, is like storytelling through media, like The Mandalorian or Loki, those sorts of things with my school age kids, are stories about humanity. Like there's stories about taking care of one another and about figuring yourself out. And if you're a parent, so my kids are 8 and 12 now, so they love stories like that have a little bit of edginess to them, but also have some real soul. And those are the sorts of things we would just like hunker together and be like, yeah, another episode's coming out. And it really would help us all kind of chill out together. So I feel like those were examples that felt like that was humane technology. That is technology, as they talk about from the Center for Humane Technology, that is centered around our goals and values and is helping us kind of reach this sort of place that we needed to be, during the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that it is, we sort of talk about like, what is good about books. There's a sort of like it is a way into some conversations. And I think that, like appropriately chosen media is also a way into some of these conversations. Like, even like this is what happened to this character. Should we talk, can we talk about that? Or my kids will sort of raise like, my kids like tend to like slightly scarier stuff. So, we watch like Coraline, which is it's like a little much. But we watch it together, and then we can sort of, and then it kind of, I don't know, it's an opportunity to, to talk through things. So I think there's a piece of that. There's a piece of that there. And there's also a piece of like, like TV can be a jumping off for imaginary play. Right. So like, my son really likes Miraculous, which is like this, animated thing with it. And then, he'll kind of, he has like a whole, like elaborate world involved with his friends involving, Miraculous and different kinds of imaginary things. And so I think, there's a role for this. There's a role for for television the same way there's for books.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, before we go on to sort of Emily's book, a little bit about how you're making decisions in real time about the news? Because I know Jenny has some perspective about news in general. and in
I
terms
mean, I
of
would
your
be
work.
curious because your kids are like a little bit ahead of mine.
They
And
are. So we actually don't keep like news on the TV for them. Like if I watch something on cable, it's usually in the evenings after they've gone to bed. They mostly will overhear NPR in the car. And they will ask questions. They will like hear things and be like, "What is sexual assault, Mom?" And I'll be like, "Okay, we're going to talk about this," and I'm going to try and frame it in words that make sense to you and make sense about things like your body and power dynamics or things like that, right? And sometimes it's something really, really upsetting and I just have to turn it off. And I may say, something upsetting is happening. And sometimes the news has more details than your 8-year-old brain can really process yet. It's not that an 8-year-old brain is dumb or bad in some way. It's just that often kids can get really stuck on some of those details without seeing the big picture, because that big picture, coherent thinking, abstract thinking develops kind of during middle school, high school. So, I mean, I don't explain all that to them, but I'll just say, like, sometimes those details, they can feel like they'll haunt you. So let's look up a news source that explains this in a kid-friendly way. And there are kids news sites that can provide that. I know Common Sense Media has some resources about that. And I think in general, I mean, during the pandemic, we've had so much to talk about with kids. We've had to talk about politics, and we've had to talk about racism, and we've had to talk about poverty and why, I had some really terrible but meaningful conversations with my kids about, say, like racism within the healthcare structure,
Mhm.
and why kids from Black and Brown communities were dying more or getting sick more than white kids. And we should be talking about these things, but you may need help, maybe from a website to think of the words to phrase it. I don't know. Do you have any kind of thoughts about the?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like part of what makes this challenging and part of why sort of like external resources are helpful is that it can be difficult to figure, like, that every kid is different on this.
Yes.
That,
Yes.
like, and it's not just age. It's kind of like with my, with my older one, even sort of during the early parts of the pandemic, she was like 9. And she is a person who really understands numbers, perhaps not that surprising,
Mm-hmm.
and for whom like numerical details about stuff is a sort of way of processing. And so we would sort of talk through the news with kind of that frame, and think about like sources that were helpful in even if it were numbers about scary things. And my little one was sort of too little, but I think there is a sense in which figuring out what are the pieces of this that are going to work for my kid, and what are the pieces of this that they are going to find really upsetting, or that they
Scary.
are not ready for. I think that's a hard.
Yeah. And also figuring out what can we do in
I thought
response to this, like,
Yeah. Sorry, Sarah.
let's telescope out now and talk. No, it's all right. Let's telescope out a little bit and talk about your book in terms of making decisions in the household. You've both been talking about ones you're making in your households, but from the family firm, you have sort of a big idea about making a mission statement that I think appeals to Jenny as well. And so I don't know if you want to outline the sort of basic tenet of your book, but from the mission statement to how you make those decisions, I think then we can get into all the various things that common sense needs has to offer parents.
Sure. So, I mean, so the sort of premise of this book, of the family firm, is really that that we can do sort of better decision making if we're more deliberate. And I think this gets to what Jenny was saying at the top, that I think part of what's been sort of hard about this kind of exhausting reentry aspect of the pandemic is that it is hard to be deliberate. And I think that we are not, we are not always thinking about the way that our family is organized in the same way that we say approach our job. And so I outline in the book the idea that like you sort of could start with the very big picture, like kind of what are we trying to accomplish? What are our kind of key values and priorities? And then going down to some of the details about, well, what do we want the day to look like? And what do we want to be do we want to be eating together? Do we want to be doing afternoon extracurriculars? Like what should the sort of overall schedule be? And I think, in some sense, when I sort of lay it out in the book, I think this whole process is fairly daunting. I do think it's actually, there's like a lot of value to that kind of deliberateness, but I also think that there's a way to pull out pieces of that in this moment to improve even if to sort of improve the way that your household is functioning, even if you're not feeling like I want to sit down and spend 6 hours like thinking about my family mission statement. And I think that actually screen time is a piece I'd pull out pretty early, and to say, look, part of this is about saying what should happen in the hours of the day. And for screens, part of how you were going to retain the kinds of like emotional, non-reactive control that you want over screen time is to say, when is the time for screens? That it should not be, probably never, and nor should it be when people whine enough. Right. I think that like sometimes we sort of get to a point where it's like, when do I use screens? It's when I have just had it.
Right.
And actually, when I have had it is not a great time for screen, because partly it makes you feel better. And then it's like I couldn't hack it. I was like, I just parented until my end. And then I was just like, forget it. I'm done with you. Like, get out of I have to take a shower. And that sort of shame spirals on the screen time. I think in some ways much better to say, okay, there's, probably it is good for our family. Maybe it's good for your family to have some amount of screen time every day. When is a good time for that? When should we put that in? And if you have that, it is, I think, much easier to then say, to sort of both get what you need out of that, which is like a break, some extra time, everybody having like, a moment to themselves or together, whatever it is, you get that without the sort of reactiveness. And also, ideally with less whining, because if you tell your kids like, look, this is a time for screen time, these other times are not for screen time, it doesn't kind of matter how much you whine. I think that's a kind of lesson that I think is more broadly pitched in the book.
And I think I agree with that idea that screen use should be pretty high up on your priorities, because it intertwines with so many things that matter for family well-being. So sleep, it intertwines with how you eat together. It may intertwine with like how you handle emotions or boredom or other things that have been really have risen to the top during the pandemic, especially. And so I think that you can actually address some of those other sources of child well-being or family resilience actually by modifying the kind of daily schedule with screens. And that is often a piece of advice that I give to families around the like very predictable times, so that kids don't come in negotiation mode with like, well, I did this and I finished that, so can I have extra of this? Or, I'm just so bored, I just don't know what to do with myself. Because that's one thing during the pandemic, so many kids being out of the structure of school and being at home in their little comfort zone got out of the habit of self-management. They really were doing a lot of like relying on parent prompts or pieces of comfort and pleasure. And so they kind of got used to and habituated to this idea of like, I used to joke that my 12-year-old, every utterance he made to me during the day was like, can I have chocolate? Can I watch TV? Can I, like, something pleasure-based, And I was like, how are you, Mom? And so I feel like he's, that I don't blame him. He was just stuck in this limbo zone for so long, being at home without all the inputs from the rest of the world, kind of telling him how to self-manage, not just coming to me and being like, what can I do right now? So now is a pretty good time, now that we're in this return to somewhat normalcy, to expect a bit more child self-management, and to be able to, have a bit more consistency with our own limit setting, that the whining doesn't work, but that but there can be some child input into the planning. Certainly kids can have a say in how much time, what sort of content, should they do chores first or after, or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, so when we sort of came back into the school year, my daughter's in 5th grade, and so she was sort of entering 5th grade, and we were going into a time in which it was, like my kids actually were in school last year, but there were no like after school, there was like nothing else. It was just like school and home, and so there was actually a fair amount of time. We're sort of entering a place where there was going to be a lot more stuff. And we sat down with her and we said, look, we've been having, this TV time before dinner. If you want to keep having that, we're going to need to figure out where the other pieces are going to fit in. And, is that something that is that something you want to do? Are you comfortable with then, making sure you practice your violin after dinner or whatever, whatever it was. And we actually had that conversation together and tried to sort of pull out the trade-offs and talk about, what, like, are we going to be in a better place if we do that, or are we going to end up in the end, I think she opted for television, which I thought was actually good, because by the end of the day, my kids are kind of like done. But it was very much a kind of let's work this out.
Collaborative. Yeah.
So this idea of the family mission statement is something you can do again and again, and you can revisit, right? Or you can do sort of a do-over occasionally.
I think all of this stuff, has to recognize that the needs of your family, the ability of your kids to be involved in these decisions, what you want to be prioritizing, that's all gonna, at least pieces of that are going to change as kids age. And there are some things which are very obviously going to change, like how much independence and control do you give your kids over the choices that they make around like anything, right? And so that as your kids age, they're going to need to be more engaged in this and more bought in, probably, if you're going to want them to be part of this. And certainly a decision like when should kids get a phone, like they're not the decider, but it also, I think, would be a very big mistake to make that decision without any input from the phone getter.
Absolutely. And especially because there's been some research showing that some kids, when they're interviewed after getting their first phone, say, I wish I had delayed because I didn't realize how much of a burden this would be or how much time it would take up. So it is important to get kids' input. You can start that as early as like 3 to 4 years of age. You don't necessarily have to take their suggestion, but at that age, a lot of choice is really important, and it might be kind of minor choices that don't really matter. But as kids get older and their independence drive is if you start micromanaging at age 7, 8, 9 and older, you're going to get a lot more pushback and defiance, especially from kids who tend to be more rigid thinkers. So having a habit of, and they don't have to be like hour-long family meetings. It could be a time where you're sitting around dinner or you're sitting around during some downtime and just say, I've been thinking about X and I wanted to talk about it and get your, so step one is like you define what you see as the problem, but you have to get the children's definition of the problem too. And their definition may be insulting. It may be something you have to ask them to reword to not blame it all on their sibling. So there's a little bit of work just to defining a common set of problems or one problem. And then everyone goes around and talks about their solution. And the solution may be awesome from your kids, something you didn't even think about.
Yeah.
Or the solution may be outlandish and you just don't react too strongly to that. Just be like, I don't know if that would work.
There's something not that.
Right. Big XYZ, this isn't going to work. Give me another idea. Like, don't like a tendency with the stressed out parent is they say something ridiculous and you just are like, no, that's dumb. We're going to do it my way. It has to be an ongoing process. And maybe they say something that you're like, well, we can test that out for 2 weeks. Let's see if it works.
Like that thing about testing it out. I mean, this is a big piece of so when I talk about like kind of big family decision making in Family Firm, I have like a process, but the last part of the process is around follow-up, and to say most of the decisions we make, big decisions, small decisions, even big decisions, they aren't like forever, and we treat them like, I'm going to make this decision, I'll never talk about it again. And I think it's right that we want to we don't want to be revisiting our decisions every 15 minutes. That's not productive either. But for almost all the decisions we make, I think there's a huge value in planning to follow up. And so the phone is like such a key example of that for me, because if we think about what are the good things about a phone, what are the less good things about a phone, they are hugely specific to your kid.
Totally.
In ways that are hard to predict. Some kids, like, they get a phone and like, it's like good to call their parents. They like have connect with a few friends. They like, and they like deal with it in a sort of a normal way. And some kids get a phone. It's like really debilitating and actually like think, it sort of it's not useful for them. And if we just say, I'm going to give you the phone and we'll never talk about it again, then you never get the opportunity to revisit if, in fact, your kid would like to tell you, you know what, I don't think this is good for me. And I think that just so I think when we eventually get my kid a phone when she's 47 years old, I plan to I mean, you sort of say like, well, let's do this in 2 months. We'll talk about it again and we'll see how it's going.
Sarah, I have more to say. You can interrupt me, but
No.
we may keep building on each other. About the idea that you can follow up and you might have failed and you can repair what happened. That sort of mindset is really, really important for parents and for kids. So for kids, you may have someone who's more anxious, more perfectionistic, more stubborn, or defiant. And those kids are like, oh, I hate being wrong. I don't want to have, someone tell me I was wrong. But when you teach them through experience that actually everybody messes up and you actually learn from looking back and saying, oh, wait, maybe that went the wrong way. Let's recover. Let's try something else. Gives them a whole lot of confidence and willingness to try new things. And then for parents, we are so judged in American culture for all of our missteps. And therefore, this idea of like, well, we're just going to try it out and we'll see if it worked for us as a family. And if it didn't work, we can debrief about it. I mean, I've had so many tech debriefs with my 12-year-old during remote schooling when he stumbled across, nonsense online. And we were like, oh, it's another teaching moment. Like, we're just going to learn from this and keep adjusting, because otherwise I'd be sitting there in shame or angry at him. And so that open communication, my kids know I'm always willing to talk about technology. And it's often feels a little stigmatized amongst families where you're like, oh, I'm worried they don't want to talk to me about what they're seeing online. And I really want that to be opened up.
Yeah. And I also think, there's a kind of, what do they like? There's a thing with your kids where if they expect to revisit some decision or some privilege or some kind of access, and then it is not a punishment. Right.
Yeah,
And I think the thing of like, like we're going to start with the phone. And then in 2 months, we're going to talk about it. Or we're going to start giving you access to this way of using YouTube or whatever. And then we're going to kind of see how it goes. If you do that in advance, then when you come to talk about it, and if you decide to do something different, it's not like because you did bad.
Right.
It's like because we planned this and this was a trial and we're going to do something different going forward. And I find, we had a lot of YouTube stuff. YouTube. We had a lot of YouTube stuff this pandemic, where, we're just like trying to figure out what is an okay way for my 10-year-old to like interact with this. And I think we had a few things where she felt like we were kind of punishing her. And I had like, by saying she, had to get our permission more frequently. And I had to explain like, it's not that you did something wrong. I didn't understand I didn't understand how YouTube worked. And so like, now we have to revisit because I made a mistake. And, we're going to have to like do this because boy, I don't know, Jenny, you probably.
I would like to take a few minutes to demystify
Thank you.
The business model of YouTube and other sort of sites, platforms. I mean, so much of the internet, I'm not talking about nonprofits like PBS Kids or Sesame Workshop, right? Those are in a different business model. But a lot of the internet, so it's going to be YouTube and TikTok and any of the social media sites and even the app stores and mobile apps. They're all based on the more engagements, meaning longer time on device or more times that a user comes back to use the device, and the more ad impressions, meaning ads watched by the user, the more money the content creator makes, who might be that YouTuber, the more money YouTube makes, and the more money the kind of app store or the app developer makes. And I realized this, we did our first study in 2017, just playing a whole bunch of kids apps. We found so many ads and they were so inappropriate. Some of them were for bipolar treatment or for really kind of gross, gory video games. And these were like ABC, like early childhood apps. So we started to raise some flags about like the ad monetization in kids' digital products is crossing a lot of lines. So I talked to Google about it and the way they could filter out some of that, but a lot was happening on YouTube as well. So I did a report with Common Sense Media. It came out last November, where we watched over 1,600 videos that had been submitted by the parents of 0 to 8-year-olds. So they went back to their viewing history on YouTube and copied and pasted the last 10 videos that their child had watched. And we saw like 1 in 5 of the ads showing up on these channels was like a political ad. Some of them were like anti-immigrant ads. Plenty were violent video games, right? So the ads themselves were a problem. Some of these ads lasted longer than the children's video themselves. They were kind of plastered across the screen. So there's a lot of sloppy monetization of kids' attention on YouTube. And that creates an incentive for the content creator, who might be that channel operator, to just make longer and longer videos or more engaging, crazy, outrageous videos, because those trend more. And the more your video goes viral and is trending, the more people watch it and the more ad revenue you make. So that's why, like, when our kids might be my son started on a Pokemon unboxing video, and within a couple clicks, he was taken to like a serial killer true crime video. And he was like, why did that lead me there? But it's because the true crime stuff trends, because it's like, you can't look away. The sort of stuff that trends is also unboxing videos where people are like showing off their lavish homes or their amazing cars, or even like kids just eating chocolate and cake. There'd be videos of kids just eating goodies and candy, right? So it's all this like wish fulfillment happening through YouTube, and like, even like Mr. Beast is like one really popular guy who does a lot of challenges. They all are getting crazier and crazier. It's like the CIA or the FBI was hunting me for like 3 days, and he'll do these outlandish challenges because it gets more views. So, we really tried to highlight for parents that YouTube is pretty much still a Wild West for kids. If your kid goes on there, not the YouTube Kids site, which still has a lot of that commercial stuff and ads, but it doesn't have as much of the creepy stuff. But if you're on the main site, you should expect that your kid may be taken down a rabbit hole that's going to be potentially not appropriate content, but at the very least, just really, really sticky, meaning hard to disengage from, really hard to pull your eyeballs away from. It's engineered that way, right? So that's going to give you a tantrum.
If kids understand that that's how it's designed, that is the first step in helping them. It's media literacy from our point of view, and it helps them be empowered against it.
I definitely recommend talking about that with kids, to be like, the designers want you to stay on longer because they make more money that way. But we can't expect that even an 8 or 10-year-old brain is going to be able to resist all of the sticky, persuasive design. So there's got to be a combination. And like, YouTube actually just made all of these changes in August to reduce the amount of notifications or autoplay or things like that, based on the UK has had a whole lot of new legislation. And in the US, we're hoping to have similar legislation. And I'm like, yay, that just makes parents' lives easier, because you shouldn't be fighting this uphill battle against like a supercomputer that knows what your child loves to watch.
Right.
That's true. Can we talk a little bit about sleep and multitasking before we sort of go on to questions? Because I know those are topics that both of you have a lot to say on.
Yeah. So let me just say, I think so on the topic of sleep, I actually spent a lot of time in my book, which also contains a lot of data talking about sleep and how important sleep is for kids and also for adults. And I think, as I say, like, I think as an adult, I really undervalue sleep and I don't sleep enough, but I hope my children will not make the same mistake. And then, in fact, your kids like need a lot of sleep, and even relatively small things that seem like relatively small disruptions, an hour less, for a few days, can actually have like very significant cognitive impacts. But there is both sleep amount, like how long are you in the bed? And then there is sleep quality. And one of the things we see with screens before bed in particular, and I don't mean like literally right before bed, but even like sort of an hour before bed, it can affect sleep quality. And so, I think that there is a sort of an added caution about, like about screen time, television, before bed, particularly if it's like, in loud. I don't know what.
Yeah, when it's stimulating, when it's like social media sort of, that every time you get a notification from a friend, you get this little, rush that's exciting. That's part of arousal that's going to wake your brain up in addition to the light from it. But
Yeah.
I also think, sleep is so important for metabolism and for immune system and kind of your thinking and your emotion regulation during the day. So it's often one of the main things we want to create some boundaries around. And what I've read from the sleep research is that if you create this feeling of like kind of a cave in your household, at least where your kids are, in the hour before bed, where you have lower lighting, where you have just like reading or other calm activities, this is really helpful, not just for the melatonin, but teaching your child to innately kind of calm their body and their mind down. And we all need ways to, from the inside out, calm our bodies and minds, compared to the screen being this external calmer. But at the same time, I know I've talked with so many families where the screen is already part of the bedtime routine, and they find it impossible to remove. So in those cases, I recommend moving to like a meditation app, like there's like Mochi Sleep Stories or something like that, where it is you're using the screen, but to teach you skills that have to do with your self-regulation. And you're not just kind of playing something to have in the background. And maybe the function is having a white noise. So maybe you just need a white noise app or a white noise machine. But it's also reducing that kind of urge to wake up in the middle of the night and grab it and play it. But I think that
by the time you get to high school, something you really don't want your kids doing. I mean, so many of these things you're discussing are setting yourselves up for success for older children.
Exactly.
And the habits
right.
around the phone.
You're really settling these norms in early childhood, investing in the child's own self-regulation around media. So if they just see it as normal, as like I read before I go to bed, or I look at books, even if reading is tough for a specific child, like those are still things that will carry forward into adolescence. And then there may be times when you have a rough night when kids don't sleep as much, and you can use that as a learning moment of like, how does your body feel now on that, like, only a few hours of sleep? Do you feel exhausted? Do you kind of understand the way that impacts you?
We had this like sort of amazing bad parenting fail teaching moment during like last year, where I took my daughter, I was taking my daughter like for like tea after school one day, and I mistakenly gave her this like quite highly caffeinated tea. It was like 4:00 in the afternoon. I just didn't realize that this tea had caffeine in it. And so she had like this huge tea, and she basically was up until like 1:00 in the morning. She's like a great sleeper anyway. And it was just like very, very unpleasant. And then the next day she did like quite poorly on the timed math thing, whatever. And and then we realized like, basically the next morning, I was like, oh my gosh, that had caffeine in it. And like, it made such a big impression on her. And we will still like raise it as like, both as like, remember the time that mom screwed up and gave me caffeine, but also like, I think it was so salient to her how bad she felt at school, that it is kind of one of these times, and you say like, okay, that's why we're so neurotic about like, going to sleep.
And the flip side is how good it felt to get that like really nice restful sleep, and when you kind of wake up feeling more ready. But that question, sorry, I'm reading the chat, Sarah.
Well, no, you should read the question from the chat. I don't think everyone else can see the chat because it's a private chat.
No, it's a good one. It's about if you've sort of gone too far without setting these things up, how do you get the toothpaste back in the tube?
Yeah. So a couple strategies I can think of is one would be to reduce things over time. Like, one way is to do a kind of a gradual decrease, that you may shift content over to like a sleep story or a meditation app or something else that's just calming music. this is if a child's actually taking the tech to bed with them, I guess, is the strategy I'm thinking of. And then reduce that over time, or slowly replace it with a book that the child finds calming in the same way, or something else that you've taught them through new ways. Like, it could be lavender aromatherapy. It could be doing a new routine before bed, like a tub. It could be actually sitting with them and snuggling and reading them a story. You're going to have some sort of replacement activity to meet the same purpose that media use was, and then teaching them that over time. I think when it's like a video gaming console in the room that the child just has a really hard time resisting, then doing a collaborative problem solving, like meeting with your child to be like, can we trial this kind of in the family room?
Mhm.
What would that feel like? What would you need there instead that would feel calming or interesting to you? Because and letting them know, it's like, let's test this out and see. Because if you get 2 weeks of success of feeling like, yeah, all right, we weren't arguing all the time, and actually I got better sleep, that'll be self-reinforcing.
Yeah, I think the sort of the kind of two things I would say about that are, with an older kid, you're going to need to engage them. It is going to be difficult to, like, have any significant change in rules, but you are the parent, and there is a sort of moment for saying, we are going to change this, or we're going to change it in a trial, or whatever it is. And there is a moment of recognizing that they will be mad. And that if you have sort of allowed a sort of an unlimited amount of video games, and now you want to limit that to less, and you have decided like that is important to do, and you have decided to do it, they are going to be upset about it. And in some ways, I think expecting that, and making it, and sort of like pulling it, sort of deciding to have that conflict in a moment when you are ready to have the conflict, is almost as important as the kind of as yeah I think that's very important, because I think we sort of get into a situation where we end up having that conflict anyway, and we have it in the moment where we're like, forget it, you've been in front of this for too long, I'm throwing it out the window, which is like
Right.
not the right way to have that interaction. Much better to say, okay, look, we have decided, if this is too much, here is the solution that we are going to have. I understand you're upset. This is how we're going to try it, and this is the outcomes we're going to look at. And to expect that they'll be mad, but at least you won't have thrown the video game console out the window.
And there's two good things about that. One is that you're preparing yourself for the distress tolerance. It's hard to watch your kid freak out. It's hard to watch your kid in distress, especially when you're like, this is about a video game. So preparing yourself for that distress. And then number two, having that conversation at a time when you're not all in the red zone, right? You're all in the green zone where you're kind of calm and can think more clearly. And you could be like, I really want to talk about the tech in the room. Let's have that conversation, or, everyone's single tasking in that moment so you can think clearly. You can have it at these times. I want to compartmentalize it around these times. And then you have to ask the child's, why is it so hard for them to not have it in the room? It may be that they want to see their friends, right? And everybody jumps on at 11. And like, that's when they want to be able to hang out with their friends on Roblox or Fortnite or something. And so they deserve to have some time to hang out with their friends, but maybe you can coordinate with the friends' parents for that to be going on at like 7 to 8 p.m. or something else that isn't as disruptive. Because this is a really important point for parents to understand. Interactive tech design can either support our needs or it can undermine them. And when it undermines us, it's called a dark pattern. It's something that we know in human computer interaction research. I like to call it a design abuse. Like, it's disrupting your life so it can make more money. So if we can teach kids that too, kind of like the Truth About Tobacco campaign of like, they've kind of engineered this in a way that it's disrupting your life. You can take more control, and we don't have to be about like China where you can only play 1 hour a day 3 days a week, but we can have a sense that you manage this. It doesn't manage you. So that's another.
Love that.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a frame here, and Sarah, I'll pull on this opportunity cost thing in the chat. I think there's a sort of a little bit of a frame here of recognizing that in some of the significant costs of technology and things that we see when we look at negative consequences in the data seem to really be because the technology displaces something else. So when we say that, technology can like that, there's a correlation between sort of consumption of technology and obesity, which we do see in the data, to the extent that there is a sort of real relationship there, it's not the tech it's not the tech itself. It's the fact that that when you are doing that for, X number of hours a day, there's not other things you're doing. And I think in general, when we think about the kind of way that we bring technology into our life, it can often be very helpful to think, what would I be doing at this? What would my kid be doing at this time? And is this a good, is this a relatively good, not good use of that time? And I think often parents, sometimes people will say, well, of course they should always be doing something better, like something different than, watching television, but that's not true. Like this is a reasonable, use of kids' recreational time. The question is just, when do you want to be having that recreational time? There's an opportunity cost, right? That's in economics. We spend a lot of time with opportunity cost. What's the next best use of that hour? And, if you're playing video games instead of doing any of your homework or being outside or spending time with your family or whatever it is, that's not as good. And like, for our family, like it's like having some TV time is great. I would not want that TV time to be from 6 to 7 because, that's the time that we get to spend as a family. And it would be really costly for us to have that time be devoted to screens. Whereas, 5 to 6 or 4 to 5 is like an easier, less costly time.
And I want to make 2 quick points. One about opportunity cost is that I don't want parents to be thinking like, my child could be doing something more productive during this time.
No, yes,
no, they could be snuggling with the dog and being a total goofball. They could be hanging out and doing something outside where they're really just like managing themselves, not being managed by you or by a screen. And number 2 is it's not just the total duration that like displaces and is the opportunity cost. It's also the scattering and interruption. So that's the multitasking issue. Is like my research on parents' use of technology around kids. Really, it isn't meant to like blame parents for like having worse interactions with their kids. It's mostly about why are phones designed in this way that grabs our attention so frequently? And sometimes it's helping us like answer emails from home. Sometimes it's just to answer a notification that's kind of meaningless. So I want parents to be thinking too about they and their kids, like when can you shut off the notifications that are less meaningful to you and carving out some single tasking social time where it's just easier to understand each other.
I think this is the other piece with bigger kids when sort of like, if you're asking them to give some, like this is sort of coming back to this question about like, okay, we're not in a good equilibrium. How do we get out of it?
Yes.
I think there's a role for parents to give up something there to sort of say like, I'm asking you to do this. And here, and here is kind of the thing that I am also going to do. All right. Sarah says we need to take a question. So let's take a question. Sorry. Jenny and I could just like do this.
I was
This
really
is like a 9-hour Zoom where Jenny and I talk about our feelings, but okay. Let's take a question.
I think you got to almost everything. I think we only have about 6 minutes left, but there was a lot of questions about kids that have to be on their computers for school, but they're also on YouTube and they're also on a video game. And I think you've addressed that, but I want to just touch that briefly. And then sort of really setting up another parent talk that we will do eventually about social media. We are at a time of rethinking how all these apps, social apps, affect our children. But the pernicious issues that have been raised in the Wall Street Journal article, we're obviously not going to talk about that today, but I just love your comments about when you get kids onto that, how to prepare them for dealing with all that, because it is really, really hard for older kids.
I'll quickly talk about the media multitasking because I do think that's one habit of mind that kids have really gotten used to this year that they may not have had the opportunity to do before. So I do encourage parents to use any sort of software like Securely or anything else that can block websites or that can put things in focus mode so kids can work and then take a break and go do something fun. And it might mean that they have to work on their Chromebook in the family room or something where there's an observer, and that you might have to have some sort of deal, like a behavioral deal where like, okay, if I see that you did this, then great, then you get your time to go have some tech fun. That it's not, you can't have any tech fun, but there just needs to be, again, you managing it rather than it constantly grabbing your attention.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the Instagram, the sort of social media piece of this is, I think pretty like, honestly pretty scary. I mean, I don't know, like, to the extent that parents either read or listened to the Wall Street Journal thing, I think in particular the stuff about, teenage girls and Instagram was really, not great. Actually, for me, it was it was interesting because I think that a lot of the same dynamics happen with new moms, particularly on Instagram, where
Yes.
there's a sort of like kind of you're seeing a filtered version of people's reality, but living your own reality, right? And so, you're there and you have this baby and like everything is a total like disaster. And then the people on Instagram are like, my baby's wrapped up in a watermelon. I'm a fit model, and it's like probably
Yeah.
those people's babies are also sometimes a disaster, but you sort of don't see it. And I think it's the same kind of like emotionally charged vulnerability that we had, when we were 14. And so I think it's in some sense that was not surprising, but it is really scary. It's like really scary. And I think it gets back to there's like a whole other webinar I'm sure you guys will do about this, and sort of how do you monitor that? How do you make sure it's like, if you're going to let your kids do that, how do you kind of make sure it's okay? And how do you pull the things that are good out of it? Right. I mean, that the new mom analogy has good parts too. It's like,
Right.
Where can you find the other people who are dealing with the same like garbage that you are? Well, you can, at 3:00 in the morning, it's on the computer.
Yeah.
And I think that tension is it's something you need to work through with your kids, not kind of in.
Well, and if it's hard for you and me, it's really hard for a kid. So it is a question of sort of filtering that into your conversations over time and building this sense of media literacy that we try to talk about at Common Sense, of having them understand how the tech is working on them, having them be able to parse what's good for them and what's not good for them. And, mirroring that as a parent, I think, Jenny, is probably the way to do it. So they are paying attention to how they feel when they see something. And that
Right.
may help.
I do.
I want to can I give in the last,
Yeah.
can I have one shout out to how much our family has appreciated the Common Sense Media rating
Yes.
system? My kids will come downstairs and they'll be like, can I watch this? Can you look it up on Common Sense for me?
Yeah. No, mine do too.
And it's so good.
Exactly. And I also, I looked through the new SEL, social emotional learning things that are meant for educators, but there's this whole group of stuff that's meant to be sent home, where I was like, I want to have these conversations with my kids. It's about your emotional reaction to technology. Do you feel controlled by technology? It's like getting in touch with, pausing and how am I feeling in my brain and my body when I'm doing this? Because right now, a lot of tech design is meant to be frictionless, to not make you think.
Exactly.
And so that learning those skills that are really metacognitive skills of pausing and reflecting is something we can start talking with kids about from early childhood. So I definitely recommend folks look that up and really just talk to each other too. I think this is something that parents, I really appreciate that in my community, we talk to each other about, like, are we all ready for social media yet? Like, we're not, and everyone knows I'm pretty hesitant about it, just knowing that people aren't really considering the needs of kids. They're considering their bottom line. And that's what, we need more. I was excited when Sensical came out from Common Sense, because that's like a YouTube alternative that is not driven by all the same, ad revenue sort of bottom line. It really is trying to filter in the good stuff. And I hope that parents just have more options like that. It's going to make their lives much easier.
Well, we have the reviews, we have the ratings. I think we will be sending out the SEL resources, which, as Jenny said, were built by our education team, but which are have take-home modules that I think are really useful for parents, just as something you have printed out and you can refer to. So, ladies, I'm so thrilled that you could spend some time with us today. Emily, thanks for being our new pal. We loved getting to know you, and I really do.
Awesome. Thank you.
She's got a new book out, and it's really good. And Jenny
It's really good.
It is good. Constant companion at Common Sense, and was featured in the Emily Bazelon education section of the New York Times a few weeks ago, which we'll also send out, which is about sort of screens and education over the course of the pandemic in a lot of underserved neighborhoods. But anyway, here's to all of you parents out there. Good luck. Stay tuned to Common Sense, and it's a heck of a ride this year. But
make it to yourselves.
Yeah. Good luck, everybody.
I know.